On the night of February 7th, 2021, Warren Barnes, a homeless man living outside of downtown businesses in Grand Junction, Colorado, was sleeping under a bridge. Despite being homeless, Barnes was a popular figure among the downtown community for his amiable disposition and his love of reading. But what would happen next shocked and terrified the community. A murderer, 19 years old at the time, had been plotting to murder someone for the past 6 months. His preference was a homeless person or a prostitute, believing there would be few people who would miss his victim. That day, the murderer had been passing through the area when he spotted the 69-year-old Warren Barnes sleeping. Would approach Barnes with a kitchen knife, a mask, and 3 layers of gloves on, and proceeded to horrifically murder him. Stabbed him in the neck. Brian Cohen Jr. was born in a small town in the Midwest, where he spent his early years. His family was not wealthy, but they were supportive and loving. Brian showed an early interest in the outdoors and animals, often spending time exploring the local forests and caring for stray animals. This interest in nature and animals was a significant part of his upbringing, shaping his values and sense of responsibility. As Brian grew older, he began to show signs of a rebellious streak. He often found himself in trouble at school for minor infractions, such as talking out of turn or not completing assignments. These incidents were dismissed as typical teenage behavior. He became more withdrawn and started spending a lot of time alone. He also began to show a fascination with weapons and martial arts, which his parents attributed to his love for action movies and video games. However, this interest started to concern them as it seemed to be taking a darker turn. One significant event that influenced Brian's behavior was the death of his pet dog. Brian was deeply attached to his dog and was devastated when it passed away. This event seemed to trigger a shift in his behavior, making him more aggressive and withdrawn. His parents noticed a change in his mood and started to worry about his mental health. The early warning signs of violence became more apparent as Brian entered high school. He began to engage in physical altercations with his peers, often without provocation. His grades suffered, and he started to isolate himself from his friends and family. His fascination with weapons and martial arts evolved into a preoccupation with self-defense and combat sports, which his parents tried to channel into positive outlets, such as joining a local martial arts club. Despite their efforts, Brian's behavior continued to deteriorate. He began to exhibit signs of depression and anger management issues, which were further exacerbated by his inability to cope with the loss of his pet. His parents sought professional help, but Brian resisted, leading to a strained relationship between him and his family. Now that you have met Brian, you will surely understand that the killer I talked about was Brian. Barnes did not die after the first stab, however, and would awake and scream out in pain. Cohen then got on top of Barnes and continuously stabbed him, ultimately killing him. During this time, Barnes's head would also be partially decapitated. Cohen would further mutilate the body, slicing open Barnes's stomach to see his guts, as he admitted to police in an interrogation, and also cut off Barnes's hands and placed them in a plastic bag. Cohen also stabbed Barnes's eyes.
I was driving along and I see a shape here on the railway track. So I'm like, oh, interesting. So I go up, and as I'm looking, I see a large thing wrapped in a canvas.
Okay.
And I'm like, that's a homeless person. So I grab my knife, I put on 3 layers of gloves, because plastic gloves can betray their users because they're so thin, those vinyl gloves, by imprinting your fingerprints through. So I put on 2, 3 on one hand. I took the knife, I pulled back the canvas, and I stabbed his neck.
Okay.
He was panicking at first. In his old man's voice, he was in his 50s. I know why I call him old man. He was saying, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Why? Ah!" And I just kept on stabbing his neck. This is okay if I do a demonstration.
Oh, yeah.
This is him. I was straddled on top of him like this.
Okay.
And he couldn't fight back. It was actually surprisingly easy. I was barely breaking a sweat. I thought, oh, this guy, he's going to be tough. But no, it was actually surprisingly easy. And during the time I was growling and making animalistic noises.
Why were you doing that?
I suppose it was a frenzy.
Okay.
I was so excited, so rushed up on adrenaline and everything. But
Okay.
just, woo-hoo! And I stripped his clothes. I cut open his belly to see his guts. They're really pink. Sorry, that was morbid. Then I cut off his head. I gave him a Glasgow smile.
What's that?
A Joker smile. I destroyed his eyes by stabbing them in.
Okay.
And then I cut off his hands. I put those in plastic Ziploc bags. And then I cut off his right arm at this joint
Okay.
and at this joint. And then at this arm, I tried cutting it here, and then I tried cutting it here. But what happened was, I accidentally broke his bone. This one, it was poking out.
Okay.
And so I left that one here, partially cut, dismembered here, bone sticking out. And then I left his body there. And then I took the head, put it in a leftover pizza box from the dinner a few nights ago. And then I took the hands, put them in the back, drove home, hid the hands and head in my room, cleaned the knife, threw away the garbage with the blood on it. And then I tried going to sleep, but I was worried that because there was a hole in my gloves right here, I was worried that they would be able to obtain a partial print.
Mm-hmm.
So I figured, why not go all the way? I drove back in a different outfit, picked up his body, surprisingly heavy, put it in my trunk, and drove to the Blue Heron drop-off station.
Okay.
I parked, so it's like this, right? So let's say this is ground. The ramp is quite steep, and you need to have four-wheel drive to pull out of it.
Okay.
And my car didn't. And B, because the back tires would provide propulsion to push up.
Right.
And I open the trunk, I take his body out, I put it in the water, and because I don't want fingerprints on a body, so I just try moving it with my shoes. That works successfully. He goes out some part in the river and floats off.
But his horrendous acts did not stop there. Cohey would then cut apart Barnes's right arm at the joints and partially dismembered the left arm. He would also cut a Joker-like smile in Barnes's face before finally decapitating the head and placing it in a leftover pizza box, leaving the rest of Barnes's body at the scene. Cohey arrived home and washed his clothes. He stored the dismembered head and hands of Barnes in trash bags in his closet. Cohey would then lay in his bed and try to sleep, but would become worried that he may be discovered by a potential hole in his gloves. So Cohey put on a different outfit and drove back to Barnes's body, where he would place it in his trunk. Then he drove to the Blue Heron River. Cohey dumped Barnes's body into the water, but when trying to leave, Cohey's car would slide into the river and become stuck. The police department would be called out to the car to discover Cohey, but he was released from the scene without suspicion. Cohey would return home, hoping that his crimes would go unnoticed. On March 1st, 2021, Cohey's parents would make the terrifying discovery. Terry Cohey, Brian's mother, would go into his bedroom, suspicious of his car sinking into the river the day prior. Upon entering his closet, Terry would discover a human head in a trash bag. Terrified, Terry would call 911.
It's a human head.
It's a what?
I think it's a human head.
Why do you think it's that?
Because it looks like it's all an ear.
Is it bloody or does it like anything like that?
I just need to come. Do I have to take a picture and send it to you?
What's the address?
Immediately before he gets in his room, he's out by the car now.
Sending officers to the residence. Police would arrive and, with permission, entered the house and discovered the head in the sink, where Terry had put it. Brian would be taken to a police interrogation room to be investigated, and it is here that Brian begins to happily talk to the detectives about his crimes. During the interview with the police, Brian would admit to the murder, telling them of how he had been planning it for a long time. Additionally, Cohen stated that he was in a negative mental state and claimed to have various mental disorders.
So, can we go back over, I didn't quite understand the dates or what ended up to the body. You said you tried, but it didn't work out. Let's go back
What do you want to know?
Just start back at the beginning and go slow and tell me as many details as you can remember.
So, because I mean, I'm already going to jail for the 15 years probably.
I have no idea.
Because
We're at the beginning.
it's murder. I mean, I'm going to jail for
Okay.
20 probably, but I figure, why fight it?
Okay.
The trial of Brian Cohen began in January of 2023, where Cohen would plead not guilty by insanity. The prosecution argued that during the interrogations, Cohen had confessed to the murders, and state psychologists determined that Cohen was not insane when the crime was committed. But defense attorneys said that Cohen's mental health disorders, such as major depressive disorder and autism, were triggered upon seeing Barnes and that he was insane during the murder. The trial would last 12 days. After a 2-day jury deliberation, they found Brian Cohen guilty of first-degree murder, tampering with a deceased human body, and tampering with evidence. Cohen would be incarcerated at the Buena Vista Correctional Complex, sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole.